Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into 1924 in the United States. And it's a year that is just a perfect historical paradox.
It really is. I mean, when you think of 1924, you probably picture the Roaring Twenties.
Yeah, exactly. Jazz, flapper culture, the economy's booming.
But our sources, they tell a much, much darker story. You have all that cultural energy running right alongside this high watermark of nativism, political corruption on a scale that's hard to imagine, and these deep, deep social fractures.
And that tension is what we're here to unpack. We're going to use the 1924 presidential election as our anchor to explore all of it.
Right.
We want to show you how the political chaos, the institutional exclusion, and these wild crime stories from that one year really define the country we're all living in today.
So let's start with the big one, the election itself. The result was a landslide.
A huge one.
The incumbent, Calvin Coolidge, everyone called him Silent Cal, he just cruised to this decisive victory. He pulled in over 54% of the popular vote.
Which is a clear majority.
A clear majority, and he won almost 3/4 of the Electoral College. He was just the symbol of stability, which is what the country seemed to be craving.
Especially after his predecessor, Warren G. Harding, died, and his whole administration was just collapsing under the weight of scandals. So this wasn't just a win for Coolidge. It felt like a statement.
Absolutely. And, historians look back at this moment and they call it the high tide of American conservatism.
The high tide.
Coolidge's message was so simple, so effective: limited government, slash taxes, and get rid of regulations. For a lot of Americans, that sounded like the perfect formula for peacetime prosperity.
And while he's projecting that, the opposition just melts away.
It's a complete disaster for the Democrats. Their ticket, led by John W. Davis, gets a historically bad share of the vote.
The lowest ever for a Democrat.
The lowest ever. He basically only holds on to the solid South plus Oklahoma. It was, a complete flop.
But there was a third guy. This is where it gets really interesting.
Right. The real insight comes from Senator Robert M. La Follette, running as a progressive. Now, he only won his home state, Wisconsin.
But the popular vote tells a different story.
It really does. He grabs 16.6% of the national vote. For a third party in the American system, that is an enormous number.
And it's fascinating because he wasn't just playing spoiler. He was offering a truly radical third way. You have Coolidge and Davis, who are basically two different flavors of conservatism.
Right. Limited government, pro-business.
And then you have La Follette proposing things like nationalizing the railroads and jacking up taxes on the rich.
When you lay those platforms side by side, you realize this election was a genuine three-way fork in the road. And here's the kicker. That path La Follette was pushing, the one that seemed so radical and doomed in 1924.
It was the New Deal.
It was almost a perfect blueprint for the New Deal policies that would sweep the nation just a few years later. His platform, even in defeat, was basically prophetic.
So before Coolidge could even get that conservative mandate, the Democratic Party had to figure out a way to lose. And boy, did they.
They did it with maximum self-inflicted damage. The convention was a political failure of epic proportion.
And everyone got to hear it.
Everyone got to hear it live on the radio. The Democratic National Convention in New York City, it took 103 ballots just to nominate their guy.
103, that's the longest in U.S. history.
A record-breaking slog.
Yeah.
And they finally land on this compromise candidate, John W. Davis.
And the fight wasn't about something small like tariffs. This was existential.
Deeply cultural. The convention got this notorious nickname, the Klan Bake.
The Klan Bake.
Because of this vicious internal war over whether the party should even condemn the Ku Klux Klan in its platform.
Which seems insane to us now, but the Klan was at its absolute peak then.
Millions of members. They dominated huge parts of the rural South and Midwest. Right. So the fight at the convention was this raw reflection of the split between the urban, more liberal, more diverse parts of the party and the deeply conservative, nativist rural wings.
And you mentioned the technology that made it all so damaging. The radio.
Yeah. First time ever a convention was broadcast nationally. So you have people in their living rooms tuning in, and all they hear is just hours and hours of deadlock, chaos, and this bitter infighting.
The public heard every single painful moment of a party basically tearing itself apart.
And that image, that chaotic image, it just made the contrast with the quiet, steady Coolidge even more powerful.
So while the Democrats are imploding, the Republicans were still cleaning up the mess from the biggest corruption scandal of the era.
Teapot Dome.
Teapot Dome. It raged all through 1924, and it just became the definition of government greed for the public.
It's consistently called one of the worst breaches of public trust in American history. And the way it worked was, it was just chillingly simple.
So you have Albert Fall, the Interior Secretary.
Right. And he uses his friendship with the late President Harding to secretly transfer control of these massive naval oil reserves.
Reserves that were meant for national defense, for the Navy.
Exactly. He just moves them from the Navy Department over to his Interior Department. And once he has control, he starts handing out these secret, no-bid drilling leases to two of his buddies in the oil business.
Harry Sinclair and Edward Doheny. And the big question for investigators was, why? Why would he do this?
The answer was bribes, of course. Fall had been struggling with money, but suddenly he's flush with cash.
And the details are just incredible.
The specifics are what make it so vivid. He gets $269,000 from Sinclair. But the really cinematic detail, the one everyone remembers, came from Doheny.
The little brown satchel.
$100,000 in cash delivered to Fall in a little brown satchel. You couldn't write a more perfect image for corruption.
And the public was just disgusted.
Yeah.
Seeing officials selling off the country's assets for a bag of cash.
And the legal fallout was monumental. Albert Fall was convicted of accepting a bribe. This was a huge deal.
A first ever.
He became the first cabinet official in U.S. history to be convicted of a felony for something he did in office. And he was sentenced to prison. It set a massive precedent.
And beyond just the prison sentence, there's a huge constitutional legacy here, right?
A vital one that still affects us. The lawsuits dragged on, but they eventually confirmed this landmark principle that Congress has the power of inquiry.
The right to investigate the executive branch.
The right to compel testimony. This scandal literally helped define our system of checks and balances.
Okay, so we've got this mandate for conservatism, a political party in total meltdown, and this massive cinematic corruption scandal. Let's pivot now and connect that cynicism to another paradox.
The push for exclusion versus inclusion.
Exactly. Let's start with the Immigration Act of 1924, passed in May. This was probably the single biggest piece of institutionalized racism of the decade.
And it was completely overt about its goal. The language was all about preserving the ideal of U.S. homogeneity.
And the intellectual fuel for this was the eugenics movement.
Yes, which had gained this terrifying mainstream credibility. It was all based on this idea of the superiority of Northern and Western European people. It explicitly aimed to stop what they called racial degeneracy by just cutting off immigration from everywhere else.
And the way the law was written was just merciless. So clever.
Incredibly deliberate. First, it just slashes the total annual immigration quota by 80%. But the really insidious part was how they calculated the new quotas. They based them on population data from the 1890 census.
And that date is everything. Why 1890?
Because 1890 predates the huge waves of immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe.
The Italians, the Poles, the Russians.
Exactly. So by using that older census, they could legally and systematically discriminate. Italian immigration, for instance, just plummeted by over 90% almost overnight.
Oh.
It was a sophisticated, bureaucratic tool of exclusion.
And then on top of that, there was the total ban on Asian immigration.
A complete mar. The law excluded any alien who was ineligible for citizenship. Period. This created a huge diplomatic backlash, especially from Japan, which had been an ally in World War I.
And this act also created the U.S. Border Patrol.
For the first time, a formal, uniformed federal service dedicated entirely to border control.
And Coolidge signed it.
He did. He had reservations, but both houses of Congress passed it with a veto-proof majority. In an election year, the political risk of standing up to that wave of nativism was just too high.
But policies like that, they always spark ingenuity, right?
Yeah.
People find a way around them.
Always. Which brings us to the paper son system in the Chinese community, which was a direct response to this kind of exclusion.
The loophole was that children of U.S. citizens could still get in. But how do you prove that when records were, well, spotty at best?
And that's the key. A lot of official records in San Francisco were destroyed in the 1906 earthquake and fire, so immigrants would pay for these fraudulent slots, claiming to be the child of a citizen. And then the real work began.
The coaching.
They had to memorize these incredibly detailed coaching books. We're talking hundreds of specific facts about their supposed family, their village, the layout of their house.
Like what? What kind of details?
Things like who lives next door to the pig pen, or how many steps are there up to your family's altar. They were preparing for hours of intense psychological interrogation at Angel Island.
That's just an incredible testament to human will. They were creating an entire fictional history just to pass a high-stakes memory test.
It really speaks to the desperation and the intelligence it took just to get into the country. Historians estimate that something like 90% of Chinese immigrants who entered between the 1880s and 1940s used these kinds of fabricated documents.
And yet, in the middle of all this exclusion, 1924 also has this profound act of inclusion.
A really jarring contradiction. In June, Coolidge signed the Indian Citizenship Act.
What did that do?
It granted full U.S. citizenship to all Native Americans born within the country's territorial limits. So 1924 becomes the first presidential election where every American Indian is officially recognized as a citizen and allowed to vote. At the exact same time, the government is building new walls to keep others out.
Amazing. Okay, let's shift gears from political identity to cultural shock. Because 1924 also gave us what was immediately called the crime of the century.
The Leopold and Loeb murder.
And what made this so shocking wasn't just the crime itself, it was the who.
Exactly. Richard Loeb and Nathan Leopold Jr., they were teenagers, 18 and 19, but they were genius-level students at the University of Chicago from these incredibly wealthy families. Their motive was just chillingly cold.
It was philosophical.
It was. They were obsessed with this twisted interpretation of Nietzsche, the Superman delusion. They truly believed their intelligence made them superior beings, exempt from the laws and morality that applied to everyone else.
So they decided to commit the perfect crime just for the intellectual thrill of it.
That was the goal. They kidnapped and murdered a 14-year-old boy, Bobby Franks, and tried to stage it as a ransom kidnapping just to prove they could.
And the perfect crime fell apart because of the smallest, most ordinary detail.
The smallest thing. Investigators found a single pair of horn-rimmed glasses near the body, and they traced the unique hinge on those glasses right back to Nathan Leopold. The whole thing just collapsed.
And the trial was a media circus, with the legendary Clarence Darrow as the defense attorney.
Darrow did something brilliant. He immediately pled guilty, not to argue the facts, but to avoid a jury and the death penalty.
Right.
And then he delivered this epic 8-hour philosophical argument against capital punishment itself. He focused on their youth, their emotional immaturity. He even brought in psychiatric evidence, and it worked. He got them life plus 99 years instead of the gallows.
So while all this is happening, the politics, the nativism, the crime, the gears of the modern world are just spinning faster and faster.
That contrast is so important. In June of 1924, Ford rolls its 10 millionth Model T off the assembly line.
The car is no longer a luxury. It's a staple. It's reshaping everything.
And the foundations of corporate America are being laid. International Business Machines IBM gets its start that year.
And Hollywood as we know it is born.
Yep, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM, is created through a massive merger in April.
And if you need a soundtrack for this whole complicated, contradictory era...
It premiered in February. George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. It was the perfect blend of classical structure and the wild improvisational energy of jazz. It captured the spirit of 1924 perfectly.
And that new medium, the radio, which broadcasts all the democratic chaos.
Yeah.
Coolidge learned how to use it.
He did. He became the first president to deliver a radio address directly from the White House, using that new technology to project calm and stability right into people's homes.
So looking back on this deep dive, 1924 is just defined by these impossible contrasts. You have this high tide of conservatism with Coolidge's landslide.
Running right alongside the institutionalized racism of the Immigration Act, the exposure of massive corruption, and this spectacular philosophical crime.
And all of it, from the clam bake to the Leopold and Loeb verdict, was experienced by the entire country at the same time, thanks to the radio. It was a year where the law clarified congressional power while broadening citizenship for one group and slamming the door on so many others.
So here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on, something that I think really captures the anxiety of that year. The 1924 election saw the total number of votes cast go up by over 2 million from the last election.
More people voted than ever before.
More people than ever. Yet, paradoxically, it also had the lowest per capita voter turnout since they started keeping records. So what does that simultaneous rise in total votes and drop in per capita turnout tell you about the anxiety and the exclusion happening at the high tide of American conservatism. What does that paradox reveal about who was showing up and who felt completely left out?